Pack your things and don't forget your stupid plant. My boss laughed as security led me out. The next morning, the CTO called him in a panic. Why is our competitor bragging about acquiring the exclusive rights to our core technology? And why is your name on the patent? I knew I was invisible the day my boss, Daniel, raised a glass of the quarterly meeting and toasted another record-breaking year. Flawless performance across the board. His voice carried across the sleek conference room, polished wood table gleaming under harsh fluorescent light. Applause erupted, laughter spilled, but not a single glance turned my way. That flawless performance? It was me. The late-night bug fixes that kept us from crashing mid-demo. The 3 a.m. server patching while my daughter's school recital played on mute in a corner of my laptop screen. The quiet fixes no one saw. The disasters averted before anyone else even realized there was a problem. The product bore the company's logo, but the lifeblood running through its veins was mine. I didn't need recognition, at least not at first. I told myself I was fine being the silent backbone, but it's funny how invisibility shifts from safety to suffocation once you notice it. Daniel noticed it, of course. He thrived on it. He wasn't the type to scream or pound the table. He didn't have to. He just leaned back in his overpriced ergonomic chair, cross his legs, and tilt his head like a disappointed teacher. Then came the dagger. Mia, why didn't you think of that earlier? A simple question, sharp enough to slice the air in front of a dozen colleagues. He framed it like curiosity, but everyone knew what it was. A public sting disguised as feedback. And what do you do when your paycheck depends on that sting? You laugh along. You nod. You file it away with all the other slights you pretend don't matter. I filed away a lot of things. Like the time Daniel joked during a team happy hour. If Mia ever left, the system might wobble for 5 minutes before we replace her with someone cheaper. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but the words burned into the back of my mind, tucked away alongside the memory of his smirk. That smirk, it became the punctuation mark of my career. Whenever a project succeeded, Daniel was front and center in the company newsletter. Arms folded in front of a whiteboard filled with my handwriting. Afterwards, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "You're a real team player, Mia," as if I should wear the words like a medal, when really they felt more like handcuffs. He played people like chess pieces. One of my colleagues, a senior developer, suddenly found her projects rerouted to junior staff until she had nothing left on her plate. 6 weeks later, she resigned. Daniel acted shocked as if she had ghosted him out of nowhere, but everyone knew. Keeping people off balance made them easier to control. And me? I stayed quiet. I kept showing up, notebook open, eyes down. The dependable one, the safe pair of hands, the person you called at 2 a.m. when the system imploded. But there's a strange power in being underestimated. Daniel thought he held all the cards. That I was just another cog. What he didn't realize was that while he was busy maneuvering pieces on his little chessboard, I was playing a different game entirely. A longer one. Back then, I didn't know how or when the tables would turn. I only knew one thing. Someday, the moment would come. And when it did, I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't throw a scene. I'd do what I'd always done. Prepare quietly, meticulously until the final move was inevitable. Still, I didn't expect it to begin the way it did. It was a Tuesday because of course it was. Bad news always seems to hit hardest on Tuesdays when it's too late to recover from Monday and too early to look toward Friday. I had just finished untangling a catastrophic memory leak that had been bleeding server performance for months when Daniel's assistant appeared at my desk, tapping her tablet like she was reading off a death sentence. "Daniel wants to see you in his office. HR will be there." That combination, boss plus HR, isn't a meeting. It's an execution. His corner office loomed like a glass cage, perched above the open floor like a hunter's blind. Walking toward it felt like crossing a stage. Keyboard slowed, conversations hushed. Every pair of eyes flicked up just long enough to register. Someone's going down. Daniel was lounging back when I walked in. One ankle propped casually over his knee. A man rehearsing nonchalance. Beside him sat a woman from HR with a folder in her lap. Her smile the kind you wear when the outcome has already been decided. "Let's get right to it," Daniel said smoothly, as if closing a routine sale. "We're restructuring, and unfortunately that means we'll have to let you go." HR slid the termination packet across the desk like a waiter presenting a bill. "Effective immediately," she added, her tone dripping with finality. And then came Daniel's flourish. His lips curved into that all-too-familiar smirk as he added, "Pack your things and don't forget your stupid plant." The words landed harder than the termination itself. That plant, a little pothos I'd nursed through office relocations in winters when the heat barely worked, had survived everything. It was more alive than my career in that moment, and Daniel had turned it into a punchline. Security escorted me out. My badge was deactivated before I even reached the lobby. People stared without speaking, the silent audience to the end of a show they'd been watching for years. To Daniel, this was checkmate, the final insult. But as I stepped into the crisp evening air, clutching a cardboard box with my plant swaying inside, I wasn't broken. I wasn't panicked about mortgages or resumes because tucked away at home in a folder Daniel had no idea existed was something he could never laugh off. Something that would make his power games look like child's play. And the next morning, he'd find out just how wrong he was. 2 years before Daniel smirked across that glass desk and told me not to forget my stupid plant, I was hunched over my own kitchen table at 1:15 in the morning. The apartment was dark except for the bluish glow of my laptop. An empty takeout container sat pushed to the side, cold noodles stuck to the lid, and my daughter's school drawings were scattered under my elbow. She was asleep in the next room, her breathing soft and steady. Meanwhile, I was wide awake chasing an idea that wouldn't let me rest. It wasn't even part of my job description. Not officially. Nobody had asked me to work on it. But sometimes when a problem nags at you long enough, it stops feeling optional. You either solve it or it eats you alive. Our system was bloated. Years of quick fixes layered over one another like duct tape on a cracked pipe. Processes looped endlessly, data crawled through inefficient pathways. And every time we scaled for a new client, costs ballooned on the surface. Everything worked fine. But fine was costing the company millions in wasted processing time. I couldn't stop thinking, what if there's a cleaner way? So I tinkered. Nights, weekends, stolen minutes while reheating leftovers. I filled notebooks with sketches, diagrams, half-baked formulas. And then one night it clicked: a leaner framework, stripped of redundancies, elegant in its simplicity. When I ran the first test, my laptop fan whirred like a jet engine. Then the numbers appeared on the screen. 30% less resource usage. No loss of speed. My hands hovered above the keyboard, hard hammering. It was like opening a secret door in a house you thought you knew. I sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the result. I knew exactly what I had. And more importantly, I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't the company's. I'd written it on my own hardware. Every line was mine. No borrowed code, no overlap with work projects, just me, a stubborn problem and too many sleepless nights. The next week I filed a provisional patent. My name, my claim, my protection. It wasn't dramatic. Just a digital submission, a timestamp, a confirmation email that landed quietly in my inbox. But that confirmation felt heavier than anything Daniel had ever handed me in the office. I didn't tell anyone, not my team, not my boss, not even the colleague I trusted most. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about survival. I'd seen how quickly ideas became company property once they passed through the wrong hands. For months, the patent just sat there. Insurance. A flag planted in soil no one else realized was valuable yet, until one lunch break changed everything. It was casual, unintentional. I was chatting with another engineer, half distracted when I mentioned my side project. Not the details, just the concept, a cleaner structure, a way to trim excess processes. He nodded politely. Conversation moved on. I didn't think much of it. 2 months later, I saw it. A new update rolled into production. Buried inside the release notes was a familiar skeleton. Not my exact code, but my method, my structure, my fingerprints in someone else's work. My stomach sank. They hadn't stolen it outright. Not in a way that would hold up in court, but they'd absorbed the idea, pieced together their own version and pushed it live. I went to legal, sat in a bland office across from a lawyer who didn't even look up from his laptop as I explained. Since you haven't commercialized it independently, he said flatly, it's not really relevant. Translation. If it's not making you money, we don't care. I walked out with 2 truths carved into my mind. 1. They didn't see the value. 2. They didn't realize how much they were building on top of it because once the door had opened, they charged right through it. Over the next year, my framework spread like wildfire. First, it angered a client-side tool. Then it became the backbone of a new analytics feature Daniel bragged about at a tech conference in San Diego. Eventually it wove itself into the company's very core, invisible, but essential like steel beams hidden inside concrete. Every release, every update leaned harder on the architecture I'd sketched at my kitchen table. And every time it did, I logged it. Not as revenge, not yet. As insurance, dates, versions, dependencies, public announcements, cross-reference with my provisional filing. Piece by piece, I was building a record. Proof that the very foundation of Daniel's empire was rooted in something that didn't belong to him. I told myself I wasn't planning anything. I was just protecting myself, but deep down I knew better. I wasn't powerless. No matter how invisible Daniel made me feel in meetings, I wasn't replaceable. No matter how many jokes he cracked about cheaper contractors, because somewhere in my desk drawer, a folder was getting thicker. And someday, whether by choice or by force, I'd need to open it. For now, I kept showing up. nodding when Daniel raised his eyebrow, smiling when he smirked, filing everything away. What no one knew was that the real game had already started, and when the time came, the company wouldn't just lose me, they'd lose the ground under their own feet. The folder in my desk drawer grew thicker as the months passed. Every product launch, every press release, every shiny new feature Daniel paraded in front of clients was another line in my logbook. Another brick stacked neatly into a wall he didn't realize he was building around himself. At first, I told myself I was just protecting my work, but there was a moment when protection shifted into something sharper. It was a Thursday morning, gray and drizzling, when I caught Daniel on stage at an industry summit. His voice came through the live stream as I sat in the back corner of our office, my headphones on pretending to code. He was smiling wide, gesturing at slides full of graphs. I had made diagrams. I had drawn bullet points lifted straight from my documentation. This innovation, he said, is what sets our company apart. It's the backbone of everything we've achieved this year. He said it like he'd stayed up at 1 a.m. chasing solutions on a second-hand laptop. Like it was his breakthrough, his burden, his sleepless nights. The audience clapped. Investors leaned forward, and I sat there with my headphones, staring at my screen, realizing something cold. Daniel wasn't just standing on my work. He was making himself the face of it. That was the day I called Victor. Victor was an intellectual property attorney I'd met years earlier back when I toyed with a side project that never left the drawing board. He was the kind of man who could turn a legal document into a scalpel, precise, surgical, dangerous. If you weren't careful, we met in his cramped office, the kind where filing cabinets leaned like tired soldiers and the carpet still smelled faintly of cigarette smoke from the 90s. I slid the folder across his desk. "It's time," I said. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Instead, he flipped through the documents, page after page of logs, timestamps, screenshots, patent filings. His brow furrowed in concentration, the way a doctor studies an X-ray. "Did you write this entirely outside of work hours?" he asked eventually, still scanning. "Every line," I said. "My laptop, my commits, my timestamps, I've got the receipts." He nodded slowly. "Good, because once this goes in, there's no gray area left. You'll own it outright. No company claim, no wiggle room. And if they've been using it, they have." I cut in, my voice steady. "It's already in production." Victor leaned back, tabbing the papers against his desk. "Then they're already in violation." We spent the next 3 hours sharpening every clause, stripping out any ambiguity that could be twisted later. The language was clean, airtight, brutal in its clarity. This was my intellectual property developed independently, protected under U.S. law. Any use without a licensing agreement would constitute infringement. By the time Victor slid the final draft back to me, my chest felt tight. Not from fear, but from something colder, something deliberate. "This is a landmine," he said. "Once it's filed, it sits there quietly until someone steps on it. Then it explodes." I signed in ink that bled slightly into the paper fibers. "Then let's file it." That afternoon, the provisional patent became a full patent. No announcement, no celebration, just a quiet submission, a confirmation email, and the knowledge that the spring I'd been winding for 2 years was now loaded tight. After that, every time Daniel strutted into the office with that smug grin bragging about his innovation, I heard the faint tick of the clock. Every client deal, every newsletter shout-out, every speech he gave was another turn of the screw. He thought he was building a castle. I knew he was stacking kindling. And then came the whispers. First, I heard my name in passing, muttered in break rooms, tacked onto emails I wasn't supposed to see. Words like downsizing and restructuring started floating around. One afternoon, a coworker I trusted pulled me aside. "Daniel's been asking weird questions," she whispered, "about what you're working on, about whether your role is essential." The word hit like a slap. I was the person keeping their system from collapsing, but Daniel had convinced himself I was expendable. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my daughter asleep down the hall, and I stared at the screen for a long time. Was I scared? Maybe a little, but fear wasn't the loudest voice anymore. What I felt was something closer to inevitability. Daniel thought he was circling me, setting me up for elimination. He had no idea the trap was already built, the pin already pulled. I didn't need to fight him in the open. I didn't need to shout or beg. All I had to do was wait. Because when the axe finally fell, and I knew it was coming, Daniel wouldn't just be cutting me loose. He'd be stepping straight onto the landmine with his own name stamped on the top of it. When Daniel told me to pack my things and "Don't forget your stupid plant," security already waiting by the door, he thought he was delivering the final blow. He thought he'd strip me of everything. My badge, my title, my dignity. But what he didn't realize was that the real ending hadn't even begun. I walked out that evening with my box under one arm, the pothos plant swaying gently as if it knew something Daniel didn't. People stared, eyes flicking up from screens, pretending they weren't watching. I kept my head level, my pace steady. No goodbyes, no tears, because while Daniel smirked from his glass office thinking he'd won, the truth was simple. He'd already lost. That night, I didn't rage or drown myself in wine or draft desperate emails to recruiters. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first sketched out the framework that had quietly become the backbone of the company. The termination packet Daniel handed me was shoved off to the side, like a bad menu. My laptop sat open, cursor blinking. I scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't dialed in months. Ellen Rodriguez, VP of Product at our biggest competitor. We'd met years earlier at a tech conference in Chicago, bonded over priced coffee and terrible Wi-Fi. Since then, we traded the occasional message, harmless jokes, bits of industry gossip, but Ellen wasn't just sharp. She had vision. She knew how to spot opportunity before anyone else. I hit call. It rang twice, then her voice came through, warm but curious. Mia? Well, this is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't waste time. I've got something you'll want to see. Her tone shifted instantly. Go on, I explained in careful strokes. Independent development, clean chain of custody, fully granted patent in my name. And the kicker. The company she'd been battling for years had built their core technology on top of it without legal rights. Silence on her end for a beat, then a slow exhale. Send me everything. Now within minutes, encrypted files were in her inbox. I could hear the faint rustle of papers as she flipped through the PDFs, even though I knew she was staring at a screen. It's clean, she muttered, almost to herself. And they've been using this for how long? 18 months minimum, I said. I heard her laugh softly, low and dangerous. Pull it and their back end grinds to a halt. My voice was steady. I'm open to licensing. Exclusively. We spent the next hour sketching terms, licensing fees, exclusivity clauses, non-disclosure agreements. Ellen didn't haggle. She knew speed mattered more than pennies. Every hour before the deal closed was another hour Daniel's company could stumble onto the ticking bomb beneath their feet. By midnight, contracts were moving through her legal department like wildfire. By 2 a.m., I had a signed agreement in my inbox. And by the time I finally closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair, the game was no longer theoretical. It was already over. The next morning, Daniel must have strutted into the office thinking he'd finally rid himself of me. Maybe he even joked about it in the break room. She'll be replaced in a week. But at 9:12 a.m., his world cracked open. Ellen's company issued a press release. Nexus Systems secures exclusive rights to breakthrough algorithm, powering next-generation systems. No mention of Daniel's company by name. None needed. Anyone in the industry knew exactly whose foundation just got ripped out from under them. By 10 a.m., the news was everywhere. Trade journals, tech blogs, LinkedIn feeds, each repost carrying whispers. Wait, isn't that the tech Daniel's company has been bragging about? By 11, the stock dipped 6%. Not catastrophic, but enough to send investor relations scrambling. And then the phone call started. My friend from accounting, one of the few people I trusted there, sent me texts in a steady stream. 10:23 a.m. CTO is losing it. 10:41 a.m. conference call on speaker, whole floor can hear. 10:47 a.m. he's tearing into Daniel right now. I could picture it perfectly. The big conference room, blinds half closed, coffee cups scattered, executives pale and silent, the CTO's voice booming over speakerphone. What I don't understand, Daniel, is why your name is on this patent and why, as of this morning, it's licensed exclusively to our biggest competitor. My friend typed every word, each one sweeter than the last. Apparently, there was a pause long enough for everyone to hear papers rustling, Daniel fumbling, then his stammered reply. It was part of the documentation process I supervised. The CTO cut him off. You insisted on attaching your name. And now every investor thinks you handed our core technology to the competition personally. Silence. Then the knives turned the room. Wasn't looking at the CTO anymore. They were looking at Daniel. In rooms like that, perception is everything. If your name is on the problem, you are the problem. By noon, industry blogs had headlines. From innovation to implosion, how one exec gift-wrapped tech for a rival. Daniel had spent years making me invisible. Now he couldn't disappear if he tried. That evening, as Daniel's empire unraveled, I watered the pothos plant he'd mocked. Its leaves were larger now, green and thriving, curling along the rim of the pot. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my friend in accounting. Emergency board meeting. Daniel looks like he aged 10 years overnight. I pictured him sitting there, sweat soaking through his shirt, watching the board tally up the millions in damage, watching investors demand answers, watching clients threaten to walk. And the best part, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't broken a single law. I'd simply exercised a right I'd secured 2 years earlier when no one cared enough to notice. Revenge, I realized, isn't about fireworks. It isn't about shouting or storming out. It's about precision, about patience, about letting the arrogant ones dig their own graves while you quietly hold the shovel. By the end of the week, Daniel was gone, officially resigned, but everyone knew the truth. He'd gone from the face of innovation to the scapegoat of disaster in less than 72 hours. The company scrambled to spin the narrative, to reassure investors, to beg clients for patience, but the damage was permanent. They built their empire on a foundation that didn't belong to them. And now it was gone. Me? I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic messages online or brag to old colleagues. I just kept living my life. My daughter and I had breakfast together without me checking server logs on my phone. I walked her to school, sunlight on my face, the world suddenly lighter. And every morning, I watered the plant. It wasn't just alive. It was thriving. Daniel once thought it was a punchline, a symbol of what I'd lose when he cut me loose. But to me, it became something else entirely, proof that what's overlooked, dismissed, and mocked can grow into something unstoppable. That's the message I carried forward, the one I tell anyone who ever felt invisible in their own story. Sometimes the quietest person in the room isn't powerless. Sometimes they're the one holding the detonator. And when the time comes, all it takes is a steady hand as thou and a little patience to flip the board entirely.